and welcome to Tirtzu's The War That Changed Everything and All of Us presentation. I'm Doug Altabef, the chairman of the board of Tirtzu, and I'm very pleased that you're joining us right now. I apologize at the outset. We were supposed to have a bit longer program featuring a panel of reservists sharing their experiences, their perspectives, but Israel is at war and most of these reservists have been called back to duty. So we're not doing that, but instead we are going straight to the highlight of the program, which is to hear from two of Israel's most knowledgeable, astute, direct, passionate, informed commentators on the Israeli political scene and on the international political scene as it relates to Israel, and of course I'm referring to Carolyn Glick and to Gadi Taub. And so we're in for some terrific insights this evening, and I hope we're covering at least two very important topics, one of which is to look at where we are right now, to get an update and an assessment of the situation not only in Gaza but up north in Lebanon and possibly as well with Iran. And then to shift focus a bit and talk about the rising torrent of Jew hatred and anti-Semitism in the West, particularly on Western campuses, and how that is affecting those societies and what effect it will have on us as well. So I know that Carolyn has a prior engagement and is going to have to jump off sooner than later, so I would like to start with her. And Carolyn, by way of context for this, it's a word that has gotten some play recently, I think it's fair to say that the majority of Israelis feel the way I feel, which is that we're uncertain, we're confused, we're concerned. We really don't quite know where things stand right now, where we are going. We saw amazing success from the IDF, success that prompted a hostage deal that released some 100 hostages based on the very great effectiveness of the IDF in Gaza. And now the situation seems to have been reversed. We are talking about a hostage deal that could be very, very open-ended, very destructive, and among other things could result in the postponement, if not the cancellation, of a Rafah invasion, which was held out to us as being key, being central and vital to the dismantlement of Hamas. We also saw a week and a half ago, and you had some very astute comments about this, the attack by Iran with rockets and missiles and drones that was virtually all neutered by the IAF and other air forces, but was accompanied by a very strong admonition from the United States not to aggressively respond in retaliatory fashion. And all of that left many of us with the feeling that the West does not want us to win, but they would like to see us be a very successful and protected punching bag. And lastly, I would just say to you as a resident of the Upper Galil, where I hear daily rockets, drones, RPGs being fired by Hezbollah, and tit-for-tat confrontation from the IIF. We have some 80,000 evacuees in the envelope of the northern border, and there is no end in sight as to when they can go back. So it is a difficult time for a lot of us. I think I'm expressing that difficulty in some, but what I'm interested is your take on things. Where do you see us now? Where should Israel be putting its focus? Where will we be allowed to put our focus? What is it that we need to be doing now, not only in Gaza, but in Lebanon and also vis-a-vis Iran? Thanks.
Thank you very much. So what I was saying before we were rudely interrupted by technical problems is that, look, we have to seize the reins again. I mean, the situation that you're describing is a situation where You have a lot of very hostile actors, whether they're Hamas or Hezbollah or Iran or the Biden administration, which is exceedingly hostile to Israel, and other international groups. But obviously, nobody is as important as the Biden administration from the perspective of people we had been relying on. Their hostility has kind of it put us into a position where we're in a reactive mode, and we've been in a reactive mode for quite some time, and that can't go on. It can't go on for a lot of different reasons, but it can't go on operationally because we have to take over Rafah. And so, yeah, I think that the hostage deal is a very big problem. The only reason to go to the hostage deal now is if you've decided that you want to lose, if you've decided that you don't have any choice other than to lose. If you've reached that conclusion, then by all means, do what you have to in order to get as many people back home as you possibly can from the position of having lost the war. But if you don't think that you've lost the war, and if you don't think that the war has been lost, then you have to fight. And the place that we have to fight first and foremost is Rafah, because we said that it's vital in order to achieve our goals. And specifically, we have to take over even more than the city. We have to take over the Philadelphia corridor that links Gaza to Egypt, the international border. We have to take that over. I mean, and from my perspective, the easiest thing would be to just bomb the Philadelphia corridor from the air, blow it up, let everybody who wants to leave go, including the terrorists. Who cares? They won't be here anymore, and then take over the area. But I'm not making the operational decisions. But certainly we have to take over the international border, and afterwards we can take our time doing the rest of it. But those are the things that we have to do. We have to do them because we're presenting a very weak position and posture, not only to Hezbollah in the north that's watching our every move to see what they dare to do, and Iran what they dare to do, but also the Americans. We've had very steady support of the vast majority of Americans. The Harvard-Harris polls have shown us month to month that American support for Israel remains fairly steady at around 80%. Sometimes it's up a couple of points to 82, sometimes it's down a couple of points to 78. But the American people support Israel. Over 70% of Americans support an Israeli operation in Rafah. But we're going to see a cultural shift among people who do support Israel very soon if we don't move forward. If we stay in this holding position where we're losing the grip on the war, and we're losing the initiative to hostile forces who don't want us to win, whether they be the Biden administration, which has clearly shown that it wants Hamas to survive this war, and all they're willing to support is Israeli defensive actions, whether it's against Hezbollah or Hamas or Iran or the Houthis, and they will not support under any circumstance an Israeli victory. Or whether we're talking about Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis themselves that are watching us and taking our measure. The American people have supported us all along because they view us as, what they used to call scrappy little Israel, that we're a very strong country, bold, courageous, and the continued hesitancy on the part of our leaders in terms of going in and doing what they've pledged to do, what they say we absolutely must do in order to win, is losing us the respect of our supporters abroad.
So that begs the question, doesn't it?
Not only a political shift, but a cultural one as well.
So really, you really beg the question, if the hostage deal is tantamount to losing, why we don't want to lose? And our leadership, I mean, you're very, very aware of our government and our leaders, and you understand them pretty well. You know they don't want to lose. But why would we be forced into being as reactive? Why are we being neutered, as it were, by the Biden administration? What is the pictures in the top drawer of the desk, so to speak, that they have on us that is forcing us into this kind of reactive, defensive, and ultimately self-defeating position?
I think that the main thing that they have on us is that over the past 2 generations, we've made ourselves dependent on American arms, not only advanced ones, but also basic munitions, including 155 millimeter tank shells and artillery rounds and other things. And they are threatening a weapons embargo on us. So I think that's the main thing. But I think, again, the only way to avoid an embargo of any kind against Israel. I mean, we've already seen it. The precursors came from Holland and Canada and the British threatening it. And now the Americans are openly threatening it. Most of the weapons that were approved and signed were transferred to Israel by the president last week were defensive weapons. So I mean, I think we're looking at that, and I think that the way to block an embargo is to continue winning. If we're not seen winning, then we're seen losing.
Right.
And if we're seen as losers, as people who aren't winning, then the tendency of people who want to support us to actually go to the bat for us is diminished, because why would they spend any political capital on people who aren't doing the work themselves? I think that's really what's going on. So I think that the message has to be to the Israeli people, in particular places like Tirtzu, is that this is the time that we have to make our voices heard. We have to make them heard, our voices heard very loud and clear, and say to the government, look, we're not going to accept anything other than victory. And look, I mean, to his credit, Prime Minister Netanyahu said again today that under all circumstances we're going to be operating in Rafah. Right. And that's absolutely necessary, deal or no deal. That's very important. But I think we've gotten to the point, time-wise, on the timeline, where we just have to move. We can't really delay any longer.
But, to your point, why would America want us to lose? It's not like, okay, guys, do what you can, but you better win. They don't want us to win. And why is that? Is this because of their Middle East grand vision, where Iran has to be seen as a semi-hegemon? What is the reason why we are not allowed to win?
And look, the Biden administration specifically is systemically anti-Israel. The people that are holding all of the key positions in Biden's Middle East policy shop hate Israel. I mean, they're not, on the one hand, on the other, and they don't like us. You have Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor, who, together with CIA Director William Burns, were the ones who negotiated the JCPOA. You have Hadi Amar, who supports Hamas, who is in charge of U.S. Palestinian policy as a special envoy to the Palestinians under Blinken. You have Blinken, who is also an architect of the JCPOA, and he's made it absolutely clear that he thinks that the biggest problem and obstacle for peace in the Middle East isn't Hamas or the PLO, which shares Hamas's goals of annihilating Israel. It's the Jewish people, and particularly the people who live in Judea and Samaria, those who live outside of Judea and Samaria, but support Israel's perpetual control of those areas. So I think, he thinks that the problem here is the Israeli right and our Prime Minister Netanyahu. And Biden shares that view, and of course Schumer shares that view. And so, they've been warring against Israeli democracy. They've been warring against the Israeli Prime Minister for months and months, even preceding October 7th. And I think that that's very clear. And also, they do believe what they view as a strategic vision, but it's really just ignorance that's disguised as some sort of a strategy, that the problem with Iran is that Israel is too big and too strong, and that what we have to do is be cut down to size, and that Iran has to be empowered in order to reach some balance of power between Iran and Israel. Then they think that the problem in the Middle East isn't that Iran is seeking to build an Islamic empire that will annihilate the free world, and first and foremost by destroying the Jewish state. But rather, the problem is that Israel, is the United States, is Israel, that we've been too mean to Islamists, we've been too mean to Muslim world all these years, and that to appease them, they're appeasing, and that's what we have to do.
Do you think the Prime Minister is strong enough to take on the enmity of the Americans and push ahead?
Yeah, I think he is, and I also don't think that he has any other choice, because we don't remember Levi Eshkol for anything other than the 6-Day War. We don't really remember, and these were people who were in Israeli politics since the pre-state days. We don't remember Golda Meir really for anything other than the Yom Kippur War. And Netanyahu has been at the top of Israeli politics, for 30 years on and off. And he's the longest-serving prime minister in our history. But he's only going to be remembered for this war, and any ability to rebuild his legacy is entirely contingent on him being perceived as fighting to win, and in fact leading us to victory here. So I think, he himself is committed to victory, and I think that he, with his very acute cognizance of his position in Jewish history will does recognize this fact.
Right. Well, he's got a lot of headwinds against him, not just from abroad, but also domestically, where the left is very happy to have a hostage deal and very happy to see it mean the sidelining of Rafia. And so there's certainly opposition to him. There's just opposition to him, period, but there's opposition to this idea coming domestically as well. And that's a lot to confront. But I certainly hope, I mean, I see it the way you do, that he has no choice. And he's a smart guy, and he's a man very, very much aware of history, and he sees that this is going to be his legacy. But he's also someone who has had the, over time, the willingness to stand down, so to speak, and not to confront, and not to necessarily poke the Americans, Obama notwithstanding, in the eye about some things. So I don't know. I think it's a big question mark, and one that weighs very heavily, I think, on most of our citizens right now.
Well, why don't I lead into Gadi, who's, I'm sure, going to be able to give you
I know you have
much
to go,
more
and
detailed.
I apologize for cutting you.
No, it's okay. Let me just say one final remark, and I think that Gadi can take it from there, which is just that, I don't think that it is at all a coincidence that October 7th happened after the left, our elites in Israel, were in open revolt and, in fact, carrying out a civil war against Netanyahu, his government, and the majority of Israelis who had just voted them into office in November of 2022, because that showed Hamas that we were weak and vulnerable. And I think that the problem that we've seen now is that the same forces that were tearing Israel apart until October 6th have decided to go back to doing just about what they were doing. And it's not clear that they ever suspended their operations, although we weren't paying any attention because we were too shocked and traumatized by what happened. So we're facing a very complicated situation. But I think one of the encouraging things that I've seen since October 7th is just how powerful, just how extraordinary the people of Israel are. I think we're the strongest, most courageous people in the world. And I'm certain that we're not going to go gently into that good night, and we will not lose this war. And so I feel very optimistic going forward, but we are in a very, very difficult situation politically and internationally today. And again, I think that all roads lead through Rafah. We have to go in there. We have to go in there now, and we have to defeat Hamas conventional forces that are that are there, and stay. That's what we have to do, and everything else. Let the chips fall where they may. I think that they'll fall much better once we've gotten this behind us.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you. And my last question to you was going to be, what can we as citizens do now? And you answered that very articulately, which is to strengthen our own resolve, strengthen our backbones, and let our leaders know that we are demanding victory, that there's no two ways about it. So I want to thank you and apologize for the fact that you were not able to get in as much as certainly I would have liked to have heard from you. But you've given us a lot to think about, and I hope we're able to reprise this under better circumstances. And the next time we do, hopefully we're high-fiving each other for having taken on Rafah and done something good with it. So thank you, Carolyn. It's very much appreciated.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And as you pointed out, I will now segue to you, Gadi, and welcome Gadi Taub, an amazingly prolific Gadi Taub. Let me tell you something. Gadi Taub is the embodiment of the New York definition of a conservative, and that means a liberal who's been mugged. He has seen the light, having lived in the darkness, and he's not only a lecturer at Hebrew University. He's a prolific podcaster. He has a fascinating, I've had the pleasure of listening to it a number of times, weekly podcast through Tablet magazine with Michael Duran, a terrific analyst in his own right, part of the Hudson Institute, and something that I would suggest that you all very much take a look at and follow him. But Gadi, do you see things much differently from what Carolyn outlined in terms of what Israel needs to be doing now?
No, but perhaps I'll add another angle. I think that it is time now, since the Biden administration is openly trying to undermine the Netanyahu's government. They have targeted Netanyahu. They're saying so. They're trying everything they can to remove him every trick, including dirty tricks. I think that Netanyahu should not only insist on entering Rafah, as Carolyn rightly demands. I think it is also time to strike back. And by that, I don't mean an open breach with the administration that is trying to topple him, but I think that what we see in surveys is that the American public strongly supports Israel. Now, the Biden administration has been misleading the American public about its Middle Eastern policy. It portrayed its appeasement of Iran as if it was containment of Iran. It doesn't trumpet the fact that it has loosened the sanctions so much that approximately $100 billion have been flowing into the coffers of the Ayatollahs in Tehran. It also restrains Israel in many places in order to protect Tehran's interests. What is Amos Hochstein doing here? First, they imposed on the weak Lapid vassal government a maritime border deal, which is a complete surrender to Hezbollah. They have demonstrated to Tehran by doing this that they can restrain their own allies in order to satisfy Tehran. They did the exact same things with the Houthis in Saudi Arabia. Remember, the first day Biden took office, they took the Houthis out of the list of terror organizations, and also they stopped selling the weapons that the Saudis needed to fight against the Houthis. And so what they are doing all over the Middle East is attempting to signal to Iran that they will reach an accommodation with Iran at the expense of Israel's and Saudi Arabia's interests. Now, if Netanyahu begins to hint that to the American public, then I think this would be something that the Biden administration would have to take into account in a year of elections. So I think it's time that we start embarrassing the American administration for what it is actually doing under the radar against its allies, and especially against Israel. And note, Doug, in the current context, when it's turning a blind eye to the overtaking of the most august universities on the continent, the Ivy League universities, by a band of racist, anti-Semitic terrorist supporters, I think the combination can be potent. We don't need to just take everything lying down.
Yeah, I don't understand a lot of their thinking, the Biden administration. It seems like they are running American foreign policy in order to get the Muslim vote in Michigan. So the joke is the two-state solution is Michigan and Minnesota, and
yeah, I think it was Michigan and Arizona.
Right.
But yeah, it's the same. It's the same thing. I heard this take also with a brilliant interview that Amit Segal gave to Christina Amanpour on CNN. I don't buy that. I think that they are an ideological administration. This began with Barack Obama. Mm-hmm. I remember Shlomo Avineri, probably Israel's most influential late social scientist who said in the beginning of Obama's first term, he said, this is not a president of the United States, this is a president of the third world. Right. And now if you look at Colombia, you see what the students in Colombia arrived at the right conclusion if you accept the premises of their professors. This is the conclusion you reach if you study Edward Said. And Obama was the first ideological Edward Saidian president. Edward Said taught Colombia. Obama studied at Columbia. And so this is an attempt to implement a post-colonial policy under a woke frame of reference where the world is divided to oppressors and oppressed, and the oppressed have license to do anything, whatever, under the sun and be blamed for nothing. It's hard to invent more horrendous things than Hamas did on October 7 to little girls, to babies, to children, tying families together with barbed wire and then incinerating them alive, and then we get blamed for retaliating or for fighting against Hamas, and of course the whole logic is skewed. But we need to look soberly at the matrix which skews this. The matrix is that the world is neatly divided, not between good and evil, but between powerful and weak, and the weak are always right. And so this is how, woke feminists who just 10 minutes ago said believe all women are siding with Hamas rapists against raped Jewish women, against their victims. And so you see how deep the rot is. And this is an ideological administration. They're trying to implement this worldview in the Middle East.
So more than one astute commentator has said that you can tell the health of a Western society by how do they treat the way they treat their Jews, and by that calculus, America is in very, very dire straits. What you are outlining is not just something that will impact very negatively as already Jews in America, but is undercutting the very foundations of American society itself. It is not just an ideological administration or with its fellow travelers, not just about the Middle East, but it's about the very idea of Western democracy or Western society. And wokeism, DEI, has pervaded so pervasively, from what I've come to understand, into institutions such as the U.S. Army, not just the universities, into high tech, into big business, and where does that all lead? And we are, I don't want to say we're just collateral damage, but the Jews are always the canary in the mine cage, and what's happening on campuses in America seems to me to be an opening act to what's going to happen, in a theater near you, so to speak, in the next couple of years. It's a very frightening scenario.
Absolutely. I think the elites have been conquered by this worldview, and the problem is that they control the universities, and this is where the cadres of the future journalists, bureaucrats, politicians, judges, teachers, everyone influential is going to come from. So indeed, it is a danger. And if I may quote General Richard Kemp, the British military man, who said, the West is at war with Iran and only Israel is actually fighting it. I think we can expand that to say that the Western world is at war with jihadist Islam everywhere. I mean, the kinds and the strains of Islam which seek to destroy Western society. And wokeism is an autoimmune disease. Instead of resisting the invasions of pathogens that are dangerous to liberalism, liberalism has evolved among the woke in such a way that it thinks that it can hug these pathogens and thus demonstrate the depth of its tolerance. And this is a complete mistake. The price of it, we see it. There was a book by Ayan Hirsi, the activist for women's rights in Muslim societies, who has been banished from the Netherlands because the government refused to protect her after a director she worked with on a film about Islam and women was murdered by a terrorist, and who also pinned to his body a note saying, "You're next. Ayan is next." So Ayan wrote a book called Pray, in which he said, look, in very large parts of Europe, women's rights are in decline. If you try to pass through Neukölln in Berlin or Saint-Denis in Paris or Arab neighborhoods in London, then women on the streets are just free game for predators. And so, if Jews are the canary in the coal mine, I think the next canary is women's rights. Because if you look at the way Jews were the paradigmatic minority which defined the way decent, civilized Western societies should treat minorities and define the way they should not. We had the best of examples and the worst of examples, but women are also a very indicative, the rights of women and the protection of women is a very indicative litmus test to the state in which society is in. And the fact that you can't walk the street in certain parts of Berlin or Paris or London or Amsterdam means that the foundations of the liberal worldview are being systematically undermined.
So let's go back to what Carolyn was saying in terms of the need for Israel to stand strong in the face of all of this, because we can't ultimately change the tides that are impacting the West, but we can do what we need to do to protect and strengthen ourselves. So as you focus on that, you're a lecturer at Hebrew University. Tirtzu is an organization that was founded at Hebrew University after the 2006 war. Has got branches on every campus in the country, and I'm asked a lot by Americans, can you bring what you're doing on Israeli campuses to America? And I say, no, actually we can't. Because while the faculty mindset may be somewhat similar, the student mindset is very different. And you have different type of students in America than you do in Israel. In Israel, you have students who have served in the army. They are older, they're more mature, and they get it more. And particularly coming out of the current situation, the students who are going back into the classroom very much get it. And the real question is, or one of the real questions is, how can we harness that kind of getting it to strengthen our society and to make sure that we are inoculating ourselves against a willingness to be neutered, to be beaten down by our so-called friends abroad?
Yeah, this is a very, very difficult question to answer, partly because these elites still dominate public discourse. Now, in that respect, there have been great advances ever since social media emerged, despite the fact that most social media giants try to tilt the debate in the direction of the left and marginalize the impact of anybody else. Now there's Twitter, which is free under Elon Musk, and there is no way to erect the kind of wall that the Israeli press erected in the days of Oslo in order to hide from the public the fact that we knew that Arafat was not heading for peace or resolution of the conflict. But there was a tacit agreement among journalists not to tell the secret to the Israeli public. I know from two separate men who went with there were once these clunky video cassettes of Arafat's first speeches after he came to Gaza and then Ramallah in 1994. And then he made these speeches in which he said that the Oslo agreements are a lie, basically, and that jihad against Israel is the overarching intention, and that this is like Hudaybiyah, where Muhammad cheated his interlocutors with a false agreement. And these two people, one of them is Yigal Karmon, who was the advisor on terrorism to two prime ministers in Israel, and the other is Professor Dan Shiftan. Both of them speak Arabic. Both of them had these cassettes with translations, and Nachum Barnea in Yediot Achronot refused to publish, and the single channel, television channel in 94 in Israel refused to air these speeches with translation. Now that can't be done because there is alternative media, and people are hungry for it, and people have developed a skepticism towards mainstream journalism, which has turned from an ethos of informing the public to an ethos of indoctrinating the public, an ethos of political activism by journalistic means. And so we believe them much less. And I think that the rise of Channel 14 is encouraging. I can say that my Hebrew podcast, I don't know if you know, is now the second most popular, I don't know in terms of numbers, but there was on a site called Geek Time, they dirgu, how would you say dirgu, Doug? They made a list.
They rate them.
What?
They rate
they are. Anyway, I was second place on that list, and the first place was Channel 12's podcast. So you see that a completely independent podcast, it's called Shomer Saf, Gatekeeper, and politicians also treat it like this. My Hebrew podcast was where Yariv Levin presented his reform. For the first time, he laid it out fully in an hour and 10 minutes conversation. So people are listening to social media. They pick up the podcasts that they trust, and they are skeptical towards the narrative in the mainstream press. And you can see it now. You can see it now when the whole press is singing the song that says that we must return the hostages at any price, and we must even stop the war for returning the hostages. And 90% of Israelis, despite the fact that it's almost a unanimous chorus in the press, most Israelis just don't buy it.
Well,
most
this is the same thing with the two-state
solution.
solution. It's the same thing. It's like they are also, save us from ourselves, help us to find the way. And the Israeli people are pretty smart, and they're pretty astute, and they pretty much get it. Let me ask you something. One of the carrots that's being dangled here is the carrot of normalization with Saudi Arabia. Now, if you're the Saudis and you're looking at all of this, aren't you saying to yourselves, am I really teamed up with the right guys? I mean, if they're willing to stab their closest ally in the back, why are they not going to, when it suits their purposes, and it has in the past, throw me to the wolves, meaning Iran, who they seem to have great affection for. In other words, wouldn't one think that America is undercutting its own ability to be an astute foreign policy player by abandoning, in effect, or neutering its closest allies? And why would Saudi Arabia want to be part of that? I mean, I could see why they'd be attracted to us, because they took a look at what happened last week with the Iranian attack, and they say these are guys that we might want to be cozying up to. But in terms of the Americans, I would think that this would alienate a lot of so-called American allies.
Oh, absolutely. If I may add to the ideological element of the American foreign policy, the fact that their analysis relies on the misconception that the problem with the Middle East is America's allies, as Caroline said, and that America's allies are dragging it into wars that it does not need. And so America should distance itself from its allies and position itself as an objective arbiter, and that would enable America to pull out of the Middle East, where it has no business of being, now that even fossil fuels, they're not dependent on the on Middle East supplies anymore as they were said in the Arab boycott of 1973 and on. But you're absolutely right. What it does is it turns America into an unreliable ally, and also Israel. If Israel is forced to lose this war by America, why would the Saudis team up with a country that boasted of being a regional superpower, but then couldn't beat its smallest adversary, which is Hamas? This is if we let the Biden administration force us to lose this war, our blood would be in the water for the larger sharks to smell. Now, if there's going to be a feeding frenzy over little Israel, why would the Saudis side with us and risk their own existence? They're very, very vulnerable. Their economy is dependent on gas.
They're a one-trick pony, and
that could be, and the Iranians showed already. They could burn their whole petroleum industry with rockets.
That's right.
And also I wouldn't make too much of the fantastic ability to defend ourselves against their drones, missiles, and cruise missiles, because they have an endless stockpile of cheap drones and missiles. And the defense, only the Israeli side of the defense that night cost $1.5 billion. They can sustain this for at least weeks, if not months, until they bankrupt us. Secondly, we should remember that 4 of the missiles actually penetrated the shield, and one of them hit the sensitive airbase of Nevatim. They demonstrated that they can penetrate the shield. And remember, for us, in order to defend certainly against weapons of mass destruction, we need a foolproof umbrella of interception. There is no such thing. So if 1 in 100 missiles can hit the target, all they need to do is shoot 100 where they intended 1. So if every 1 in 100 hits its target, they have enough to deliver, God forbid, a nuclear weapon that would penetrate the Israeli shield, and we should not be cocky about it. And the fact that America is trying to say, the Biden administration is trying to say that that's some great victory, that's not a victory. You cannot achieve victory over aggression by defensive means. There is no such thing. And this was the conception, the misguided conception of the IDF. For 20 years, we thought we can hide behind the super surveillance walls and cyber and Air Force and not need the iron fist of an armored army. And this is shocking, Doug, because what it really means is Israel for 20 years has been preparing for the wrong war. And now we are unprepared for the
war
possibly
we're in.
coming wars. Yeah.
We're in.
And the Iranians invested everything in their drones and missiles. Everything. They don't have a ground army to speak of. They have no air force to speak of. They invested only in offensive weapons, and this is proving itself. That tactic is proving itself against us. It's proving itself against Ukraine.
I want to go back to your point about Israel considering making a breach with the Biden administration. And maybe this isn't a breach, but maybe it's an end run. And that is the idea of taking the Abraham Accords we were talking about, Saudi Arabia, and having Israel envision that as a regional alliance, including states like India, including Southeast Asian states. In other words, saying, yes, we envision that America is not our ally. We can't count on them. We hope to be able to segue into our own self-sufficient missile production, weapon production capability. But looking down the road, we want to start getting closer and more proactive with other states that probably feel the same way we do, if they, when they, talk about it in private among themselves, that the United States cannot be counted on. And might not be a very powerful antidote to not only Iran, but to this idea of an American vacuum being created in the Middle East.
Yeah, I absolutely support that. We should, first of all, we should end our addiction to, it's not just dependence, to American military systems, and especially ammunition. Israel can manufacture the most sophisticated, high-tech instruments of science, and it can't produce 9mm bullets. This is crazy. Yeah. We have maneuvered ourselves into a situation where we cannot conduct a war unless America allows us. And being an ally of America doesn't mean being a vassal state. There were historically speaking, there were quite a few breaches with the United States, beginning with the War of Independence, where the United States participated in the embargo on weapons to Israel, and all the way to the crisis of the Suez and some friction with the Nixon administration until the Yom Kippur War. Some of these things are only recently being revealed, and being an ally doesn't mean being a slave. Right. And we shouldn't act slavishly. We should, first of all, manufacture our own materiel. We should certainly, as you suggest, create new alliances and diversify our alliances in such a way that the United States won't feel that it can just have us under its thumb. The situation now is that they basically, that Blinken, in one of his visits here, demanded a private meeting with the chief of staff of the IDF. Right. What is this? Right. They have declared that they will sanction a brigade of the IDF. Right. The IDF has a hierarchy of command. It's under a government of a sovereign country. If you have a problem with anyone in the IDF, you go to Israel's government. You do not come penetrate from the side, undermine our sovereignty, and dictate policy to the IDF by threats. This is what they're doing. They are disrupting our chain of command.
They're meeting with the war cabinet. They're meeting in the Kiryat. They feel like it's open home week for them all the time, and I don't understand this. You mentioned the thing about the Netzach Yehuda Brigade being sanctioned. Then, of course, there are these ICC sanctions, which we should basically say, go ahead, make my day, and what are you going to do about it? In fact, start a whole campaign that you're nobody if you're not being sanctioned by the ICC. But we seem to be cowering in the face of this kind of these threats, and I think a lot of them are bluffs, and they need to be called.
But there is also real danger, because if we don't have essential supplies, essential spare parts for equipment that the army uses, and especially ammunition, that's a grave threat. They're standing on our oxygen pipe. Secondly, in the international arena, they can cause Israel great harm in a fairly hostile world. But I think we're going to have to we are going to have to maneuver wisely, not declare all-out war. Even what I suggested, that we start speaking to the American public and exposing Biden's Middle East policy, shouldn't be done in some blunt way that would be an open breach. It should be done wisely. But we should also, you and I discussed this brilliant piece by Tony Badran called the New Herodians, in which he made an analogy to the end of the days of the Hasmonetes kingdom, in which the warring factions, one of them, the son of Antipatris, King Herod the Great, made an alliance with the hegemonic empire in order to defeat his local enemies. And by becoming a client of the empire, basically surrendered the political independence of the kingdom of Israel. And after Herod, it indeed declined and dissolved and became a province of the Roman Empire. And Badran said, are we not doing this again? Now we have someone like Benny Gantz fighting Netanyahu from within the cabinet, going back and forth to the United States. It seems like he's getting instructions on how he should undermine the government. And then we see the whole, not just the noisy protesters, who are now just a very small band, but the whole of the left. And I remember this because I come from the left. It has gotten itself addicted to the dream that if it can't convince Israelis to partition the land, then it must encourage the external pressure, and especially the United States, to be the responsible adult who will make us do what we all know we should do, what we all on the left know we should do, but the Israeli deplorables and religious messianic traditionalists, Likudniks, Chachachim, wherever, don't understand yet, because they're primitive and stupid and religious and superstitious. And so they have lost the basic instinct of Zionism, which is political independence. What is Zionism about, if not making the Jews, as our Declaration of Independence marvelously puts it, masters of their own fate? Right. We are giving up the essence of democratic Zionism, self-determination, in order to win this fight between elite factions over a two-state solution that does not exist and that the Israeli public will never accept. But in their view, all the stars have aligned, right? There's an administration willing to put its foot down, prevent us from winning the war, and then installing the Palestinian Authority back in Gaza, so you have a unified Palestinian leadership who can return to the table of negotiations over the two-state solution, where a chastened, weakened Israel would be more pliable to American imposition, and then the benevolent, responsible adults will force Israel, the weakened Israel, to partition the land with the Palestinians. Well, first, the Israeli public, before October 7th, has learned the lesson and does not agree to any such two-state solution.
Yes, but
secondly, there's no Palestinian.
But what you're saying is not only are these leftists losing faith in, and they've lost their faith in Zionism, but they're demonstrating that they've lost their faith in democracy itself.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And the deplorables don't count. This is what's going on in the United States too. Forget what you want. It's what you should want. Forget.
Absolutely.
And by the way, you don't know what you should want. I know what you should want, and I'm here to inform you and to guide you and to teach you whether you like it or not.
Exactly. This is going on all over the West. This was the theme of my book, Ne'adim V'Nachim, the mobile and the sedentary, I guess, would be the literal translation. But look at the European Union. It's the same thing. It's a structure where elites control and legislate for majorities who are deprived of their franchise, basically. The nation state in which European publics have the mechanism and the ability to decide their own fate is now subordinate to this huge, cumbersome, incomprehensible structure in which votes don't really count. There's a European Parliament, but it's not a parliament. It can't legislate. It's a forum for complaints, and it has some vague authorities, some of which touch on legislation, but it can't even initiate a law. And we see the same in the United States, and we see this here. And we know this, Doug. What was the fight over the reform? The fight over the reform was, there was a reform designed to return power that was usurped by the Supreme Court to Israel's voters. And the elites went wild because what the form of government that they seek, essentially a juristocracy, a state controlled by judges, or as Shlomo Avineri once said, bagatzokratia. It's the Supreme Court rule. This is how they managed to impose their views on the majority. And the minute the public, through their elected officials, tried to touch that structure, they went into the street misleadingly screaming, "Save democracy." They were not saving democracy. They were saving their own power from democracy, in which, as you rightly say, they have long ago lost faith.
So let's try to end on a more positive note, because we can sort of wring our hands for hours on this. Carolyn mentioned this, and I'd like you to pick up on it as well. What can we, regular citizens, we the deplorables, how can we help ourselves? How can we help our country right now? What can we be doing?
First of all, enlighten ourselves. So support your media. My podcast is part of the Midah website, which is an independent website. But if you use another independent source of information, contribute to that. This is how it works in the new world, on subscriptions. Secondly, get involved politically and get out to the streets. We on the right generally are timid in this respect, and especially since the attempt to protest was squashed, right? By an aggressive attorney general and police in the days of the Itnatkut. This is not the privileged protest that we see now, that they can block Ayalon and start bonfires in the middle of roads. In the days of Itnatkut, the deplorables try to sound their voice, and the powers that be just sent them to jails in droves. There are about 700 indictments for illegal demonstrations back then, and there is one now. There are 3 others of some other things, but there is one now. Someone painted Bibi Boged, Bibi, it's a traitor, on Ayalon, and he got indicted. All these people starting bonfires in the middle of the streets weren't. So we need to shake off the timidity that we have learned. We need to increase our the percentage of active votes on the right, and we should continue doing what you and I are doing now, raising awareness.
Sorry about that. I've got seasonal stuff, and I'm amazed I made it as long as I did. You were patient to wait through our technical balagan, and you were wise to inspire us with your insights, and I want to thank you. I want to leave this on a note of reflection. We are the Jews. We are the people of hope. We are the Israelis. We're the people of resilience. And us at Tirtzu, we are the can-do future of this country. We all just read in the last week the amazing words in the Haggadah that resonate for all time, and they particularly resonate now, Yehi Sha'amda, that in every generation there are those who rise up to destroy us, but Hashem saves us from their hand. And that is particularly important right now. That should be our guide star. That should be kept in our pocket, so to speak, our motivator, our comfort. We are people who have dealt with far worse problems, and we have managed through them. And please God, we will prevail in this situation. I strongly believe that. I strongly believe in the power and the strength of the Israeli people, a strength that both Carolyn Glick and Gadi Taub referenced. I see it all the time with our leadership at Tirtzu, and that is what we ultimately will be falling back on. And
absolutely.
And that is a great strength. And so I think we should just end with the recognition that we can and we will prevail. Am Yisrael Chai, and I want to thank all of you for tuning in, enduring not just my cough, but the technical issues that we had to deal with. That's also part of the Israeli experience. And Bisorot Tovot for all of us. Gadi, thank you again for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Doug. It was a pleasure.